Afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon Wyke and I work for the Greater London Authority. I've come to talk to you today just to sort of give you a city's perspective. Hopefully what I'm about to talk about will sort of pick up on a number of things that we've actually discussed during the course of the morning. So hopefully you'll sort of get a chance to see how the city's sort of implementing some of the things that we're sort of been talking about. I'm going to talk basically about the role that we play in addressing climate change, mitigating climate change, delivering sustainable energy, and then also sort of the role that we've specifically got for sort of district energy in that. Oh, have you got? Thank you. Yes, okay, just as I mentioned, I will talk quickly about the GLA family just so that you know the context for the Greater London Authority. I'll just touch on political commitment and sort of senior leadership in organisations, really fundamental for sort of helping to drive these kind of initiatives forward. I'm going to talk about our climate change mitigation energy strategy, then the role of district energy, and then just sort of walk you through the journey that London's been on since sort of about 2000 when the GLA was sort of set up, sort of what we've done to enable district energy and where we're hoping to go. Okay, basically sort of the Greater London Authority is a regional government, and within the Greater London Authority there are actually sort of 33 local authorities. So we work at a regional government level, setting strategic direction. Also sort of within the Greater London Authority, we have London and Partners, which is a sort of an inward investment organisation. We have Transport for London, we have the Metropolitan Police, Fire and Emergency Services, and also the Olympic Legacy Development Corporation. Well, unfortunately, the slides don't seem to have quite come out on the formatting, but we'll crack on anyway. And then sort of as part of that, as I mentioned, it's a very strategic organisation. So we've got a number of strategies that the sort of mayor needs to develop. The major one is this spatial planning strategy. That's the London plan. We've talked a lot about sort of planning already sort of today, and it is fundamental to the evolution, the development and the growth of the city. What can we do in London to enable sort of growth to happen in the most sustainable way? We'll have a transport strategy that sort of looks at transport infrastructure, how enabling people to move in and around the city. We have an economic development strategy that looks at economic development, obviously. Then a number of environmental strategies, of which the climate change mitigation energy strategy is one. We've talked a lot about the challenges of today, so I won't sort of go into those too much. But I think sort of in London, we've got a real big challenge around growing populations. We've just this year, just actually last year, we hit 8.7 million people. That's the largest as London's ever been in its history, just topping the in the 1930s when there was a big movement into London again. So we've now got sort of a larger population that we've ever had in our history, and the projections are that sort of by 2050 we could be sort of over 11 million people. So that's sort of over, so potentially getting up to about 100,000 people coming into London each and every year. So obviously so that presents massive infrastructure challenges. That's accommodation, workspace, obviously sort of that energy issue as well. Then on top of that, we've obviously got to ensure that we've got security of supply. We've got affordable energy infrastructure, addressing things like fuel poverty, which is an issue in the UK, and also sort of obviously sort of meeting those climate goals as well. And sort of what we sort of hope to do sort of through this is sort of by one, addressing energy efficiency, reducing demand, but also sort of looking at energy generation at a city level and sort of trying to move towards a sort of a more circular energy economy within the city, where sort of we're reducing demand, we're generating some more energy within the city, but we're also utilising secondary energy sources within the city, integrating those into our energy systems. So we're moving demand for primary energy upstream. And then also sort of the other thing that's really important for us is to integrate heating and power systems. Sort of quite often those two infrastructures have worked quite separately, but increasingly we're sort of looking at district energy, the role it can play not only in providing heat and low carbon heat and affordable heat, but also the role it can play in supporting the electricity network and bringing on larger amounts of sort of intermittent renewables into the electricity network, also the role it can play in grid balancing and enabling like sort of storage of surplus electricity as thermal, as heat, and then utilising that within our heat networks. Oh dear, we've really got some formatting issues now. Basically, this is just to tell you about our climate change targets. We've got two major targets. Our first one is a 60% carbon reduction target by 2025 with an 80% by 2050. But as a city, we'll be hoping to go beyond that 80%. That's a national requirement, that 80% by 2050. And this is sort of, and what this gives you is an indication of where those emissions come from. You can see almost 80% of our emissions come from buildings. That's a real big challenge for us, existing buildings. And so that's consumption within those buildings and sort of the supply of energy into those buildings. And then transport is about 20%, just over 20%, 22. And so that's because we've got a very extensive public transport system. Quite unusual for a major city to have that lower level of emissions in transport. That's because we've got a very extensive public transport system that allows people to move around in the most efficient way. Obviously, we're putting additional infrastructure in place, additional investment into that to continue that, creating sort of very interconnected transport hubs that allow people to move around the city without having to actually get in private vehicles. And this is just a graphic to show you basically sort of where London's CO2 emissions. You can sort of see 1990 were about 45 million tonnes. In 1990, it peaked in 2000 at just over 50 million tonnes per annum. And then we sort of dropped over the course of the next 13 years. You can sort of see 2013 was sort of just over 40 million tonnes. So that's about a 12% reduction in CO2 from 1990 levels. And you'll have remembered from a previous slide, we've got a 60% by 2025. But actually, sort of by 2015, we're hoping to get to 20%. So fingers crossed we'll get there. And this is just very quick to show you sort of how we sort of break that down. We look at our sort of what we're doing in three sectors. Basically, at a buildings level, we've got residential and commercial and public. We sort of break those down in the emissions related to those, and also from a transport perspective as well, and sort of what each of those can do and where reductions might come from. And so we've got existing activities that are happening, new government initiatives that will work. We've got mayoral initiatives that will sort of add additional activity, and then we've also sort of got future activity from both government and at a mayoral level to try to reduce emissions further. So we want to go from 45 million tonnes per annum down to 18 million tonnes per annum by 2025. And this is just a sort of summary of that climate change mitigation energy strategy. We look at it at a sector-by-sector basis, and sort of what we're sort of really concentrating on in London sort of is using public money to sort of help catalyse the market, support the market, prove the business case, show that investment opportunities sort of make financial sense, de-risk that activity so that we're attracting public sector money in to support that. What we're wanting to do is look at programs that are able to scale up, so that we're actually able to scale those up and sort of deliver those across London in the most sort of financially effective way. As I mentioned before, we've got 33 London boroughs within London, so we need to work very, very closely with those to ensure that the programs that we're looking to do and that they're looking to do are as effective as possible. And then also, obviously, we're looking to sort of set an example through the GLA group and what we can do, both at a London, UK, and a global level. Okay, just a little bit about our energy efficiency and our transport programs very quickly, and then I'll just move on to the district energy aspect. So we do obviously sort of recognise energy efficiency fundamental to sort of meeting our energy goals, and also sort of to ensuring that we've got sort of affordability of energy supply. So we've got two major sort of programs, one for residential called Renew, and another for public buildings, which is sort of looking at supporting retrofit of existing buildings to reduce demand. Also around transport, sort of mitigating emissions related to transport. I mentioned that we've got a very extensive public transport system, and consequently sort of a lot of investments going into that. And when we're looking at buses and things, we're looking at hybrid buses and hydrogen buses. We've got examples of those in London that's helping to sort of create market opportunities for those types of technologies, hoping to increase those continually throughout the decade. Then obviously sort of individual private vehicles and things as well, so sort of cars, scooters. We've already got some hydrogen taxis sort of in the sort of that iconic sort of London black cab design as well. We've got sort of, and we mentioned congestion charge a little earlier as well. So sort of got congestion charge, and sort of where if you've got sort of low emission vehicles, then sort of you're exempt from that congestion charge. So again, trying to sort of work towards encouraging the market, and obviously looking at sort of how we can integrate sort of supporting infrastructure. Okay, and then now sort of just talking about that sort of decentralised energy and district energy aspect. I mentioned we've got a 25% decentralised energy target, which basically means that in London what we're looking to do is provide 25% of our energy demand from local energy sources by 2025. We've estimated this will sort of reduce our carbon emissions by sort of around 3.2 million tonnes, hopefully more, depending on the sort of the type of technologies that are sort of integrated in that, and sort of deliver sort of 12%, it's a minimum 12% of our CO2 savings. Over 50% of that we're sort of expecting to come from large and medium scale sort of district heating systems. Obviously combined heat and power play a role in that, but obviously as we go through the years, increasingly there'll be contributions from renewable and also sort of waste heat or sort of secondary energy sources. And just something here to sort of mention that sort of, and I mentioned about the investment opportunity and things, it's something that we're sort of really keen to do in London, is to sort of promote actually what the challenge is, what we need to do to address it, but actually what that investment opportunity is for businesses. Again, it's going back to that job creation opportunity investment. And sort of, we're looking at sort of about a 10-fold increase in generating capacity, but it's sort of estimated through a study we did at about an 8 billion investment opportunity. And sort of at the moment we're getting increasingly favourable policy framework at a national level. Obviously we've already got very sort of favourable policy framework at a London level as well. So sort of what that's doing is that supporting activity in that area. And as I mentioned before, what we're looking to do is try to remove the barriers to delivering district energy, sort of sharing risk with the private sector, and sort of harnessing private sectors, both their finance and also their ability to deliver. Okay, and sort of we've talked a lot about electricity here and sort of in the renewables things, but actually sort of in London, sort of heat, I mean like in sort of across the world, heating and cooling, we've got sort of nearly half of our energy demand actually sort of comes from heat, and sort of consequently that's a really sort of large part of the sort of the challenge that we've got, about 30% of our CO2 reductions. And sort of we think that sort of in London we've got sort of, that's a really good opportunity for us to sort of help to lead the way in London and sort of look at sort of what's the best way of decarbonising that area. So we work very closely with national government on electricity and policy and decarbonisation, but decarbonisation in the UK sort of is happening a lot at a national level, sort of decarbonising the grid. So we're working closely with national government, but we think London has got a real important role to play in heat. What we're looking to do there is obviously reduce the level of energy demand for heat. Sort of, we're looking at sort of locally sourcing sort of a number of those issues, reducing the carbon intensity of the heat. What we're sort of starting to move to more and more is about sort of low carbon districts and things and neighbourhoods, actually sort of not just doing energy efficiency or decarbonisation of supply, but bringing those two together so that you're able to sort of deliver a low carbon and ultimately zero carbon district in the most cost effective way. Then also sort of, as I mentioned, sort of London's a sort of a high density urban environment with high heat demand. So there's a number of places within London where sort of we've done our research and sort of actually sort of district heating is sort of the most cost-effective and carbon-effective way of sort of supplying those solutions. That's really important to us. What we do is we always look at what is the cost of delivering heat into homes and sort of how cost-competitive is district energy. Now I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the process that we've sort of gone through sort of between since we were sort of set up to sort of to where we've got to. Initially I mentioned the our spatial plan, the London plan, that sets the sort of the development framework sort of for London and how we see London evolving and growing. What that enabled us to do was to sort of have a look at what our energy demand is. Sort of we gained our political support, and sort of what we're trying to sort of do now is one, ensure that planning policy is encouraging district energy, and also sort of where we've got opportunities for district energy, we're providing support to develop those projects out. So a lot of energy master planning. So what we did initially was London heat map, which was basically just sort of looking at London and sort of saying, where is the heat demand in London? Where are the heat sources? Do we have a viable business case for developing district heating in various parts of the city? And what you'll sort of see from the map on the right is there sort of significant parts of sort of where heat demand sort of we believe is sufficiently high to make sort of district energy a cost competitive way of supplying heat into buildings. This is publicly available, so it sort of helps all stakeholders to be able to develop an understanding of where we see district energy might go. And then taking that another step further is our energy master planning, actually taking that heat map and going down into greater resolution, understanding where the real opportunities for district heating are, where they might be, what they might look like, what the network routes might be, and what local authorities need to do to be able to sort of safeguard those areas and encourage the development of district heating in those areas. So supportive planning policy. And we've done that in 14 of the boroughs already. And as part of our London plan, we have things called opportunity areas, which are large-scale regeneration areas within London, where we see large amounts of residential development and job creation happening. And sort of for those areas, we create energy master plans, which will sort of drive, supports the energy system development. And then what we needed to do is develop projects out. So we know where our heat demand is, sort of we know what the system's sort of starting to look like, but sort of how can we get those projects developed and brought to market? And we had an EU-funded project through the European Investment Bank that provided us with development funding to provide technical, commercial and financial support to stakeholders to be able to develop out district heating systems and take them to market, get them funded. And we had £3 million, of which sort of 10% of that was funded by the EGLA, 90% by the European Investment Bank. And that £3 million has provided us over the 4 years from 2011 to 2015 with a pipeline of 21 projects that we've actually taken right through to market. That's over £100 million worth of projects. And we've got a number of other projects obviously in the pipeline that we've developed through that, and that we're looking at developing a successor programme that will continue to support the development of those projects. Really, really important for developing district energy to have that technical and commercial support. And then the other bit I've talked quite a lot about is investment and things. And one of the things we recognised we needed to do was to create an investment vehicle that would actually support the development of these projects and provide a rate of interest that would sort of allow them to sort of provide a commercial rate of return. And so this is something we set up using European Regional Development Fund. It's a European funding stream matched with public sector money and then matched again with private sector money, creating an opportunity to fund district energy projects, prove the business case, prove that they're commercially viable, raise awareness and understanding within the financial sector of what the demands are for district energy projects, and hopefully sort of encouraging greater flows of funding into district energy. A European project around district energy, district heating and cooling, sort of called Celsius, sort of where we've got 5 partner cities. And one of the key things to that is about trying to accelerate the uptake and delivery of district heating in cities. And we've got 2 main activities there. One, the delivery of demonstration projects within each of those cities. And also the other part is sort of about providing support to cities across the EU to help them understand the opportunity for district energy in their cities. One of the main premises for this was basically sort of actually in the EU there's enough heat wasted to sort of meet the entire heat demand that we've got with our building stock. But unfortunately, we don't have the infrastructure to move that heat from where it's produced to where it's needed. And sort of that's sort of one of sort of the major benefits of sort of district energy. How can we move the waste heat that's being generated within a city from where it's produced to where it's being utilised? This is our London demonstrator, basically sort of in central London, sort of central northeast in the Islington Council. They're developing out a sort of a project that's completed in phase 1, sort of 1.9 megawatt CHP, sort of 850 homes and 2 leisure centres, already delivering sort of 60% saving on CO2 and a 10% reduction in heating bills. And sort of the next phase, which is part of the Celsius project, is actually sort of how can we integrate waste heat into that system. So starting to move from gas-fired CHP into sort of renewable and waste heat sources. And this is taking waste heat from a tube ventilation shaft and putting it into, raising the temperature of that heat with a heat pump and putting it into a heat network. And just quickly to show you where that is, you can see in the orange we've got the existing network, the red is the extended network, and the new heat source. So we're starting to integrate multiple types of heat sources that are naturally occurring within a city into a heat network. And there's just a better picture of the actual sort of ventilation shaft. At the moment, that's warm air that comes from the tubes. So if anyone's been to London, you'll know that the tubes are very warm. That air has to be vented from the air system, and that goes out in ventilation shafts. So what we're doing is recovering the heat from that air using a heat exchanger and then elevating that to a temperature that can go into heat networks. And then the other element of our Celsius project, as I mentioned, is the support to cities. And just quickly to show you that what we're doing is trying to provide access to the demonstrators that we've got, putting the information and knowledge that we have as cities into a toolbox. It's a sort of, we're developing a Wikipedia type approach so that sort of people can go in there and sort of try to see what it is that they need to help to develop their programs and access that. Also sort of access to partners within the consortia on specific issues, and also looking at developing thematic workshops and webinars. Basically, again, just to support cities to around some of the pertinent issues. And then what that's done for us in London is actually said to us, wow, in London we don't have a lot of waste industrial heat, high-grade waste industrial heat, but what we do have actually sort of is a lot of low-grade waste heat. How can we utilise that and support our systems? So what we did was a study looking at secondary heat sources. Those heat sources are basically sort of environmental heat, which is sort of air, water, ground, and then sort of waste heat that sort of comes from sort of industrial processes. It can come from cooling systems within buildings. It's within tube ventilation shafts, it's within sewer systems, it's in sewage treatment work. So where else is the heat that we can actually recover that's within the city and integrate into heat networks? Obviously, some of the issues are lower temperatures in those secondary heat sources, and often they can be sort of seasonal as well. We wanted to try to develop policy, develop opportunities, and raise awareness of how actually heat networks can support the transition towards a low and zero carbon economy. And this just shows you where our secondary heat sources are, and the one on the right is the demand map. So fortunately, sort of you can see that sort of there's quite a good overlap between where those secondary heat sources are and where the demand is. So hopefully that'll mean that they're sort of cost effective to integrate into networks. So just quickly, some of the findings. Sort of it obviously is low-grade waste heat. We'll need to reduce the operating temperatures of our heat networks from the traditional sort of 90 degrees. We're looking at 70 at the moment. Sort of maybe go down a little bit lower again than that. Obviously, that then makes it more cost-effective to integrate low-grade waste heat. And just a quick summary, sort of you'll see that London's overall heat demand was sort of 66 terawatt hours a year, where it was estimated that we had 71 terawatt hours of heat combined between the existing heat sources and the energy required to sort of bring that to 70 degrees. And then we looked at actually sort of how cost effective is that, and sort of you can see that sort of 18% of actually sort of we could meet 18% of our heat demand now in a cost effective way through the utilisation of secondary heat sources and district heat networks, and also sort of 56% of our heat demand actually is carbon effective. So actually sort of it'll be more carbon efficient to heat them using secondary heat than it would the traditional way. And that counterfactual way that we use are gas boilers in the UK. So I'm pretty much finished now because I'm conscious you'll be keen to get to lunch. And this is just, we also talked about planning and long-term planning, and actually this is our London Energy Plan. It's something that we're doing, and we're looking at this right out to 2050. It's the first time sort of that we spatially looked at energy, and we're looking at energy demand, we're looking at energy generation, and we're also looking at energy infrastructure and distribution infrastructure. So how do those interplay? So I mentioned we've got a very large amount of population growth in London. We need to accommodate that, and how can we most effectively accommodate that in the most with energy systems that are most secure, affordable, and low carbon. We're generating a number of scenarios that will sort of look at how we might be able to get to our 2050 sort of minimum 80% carbon reduction target, and sort of different utilisation of sort of district heat networks, other sources of heating, electrification of heat, electric vehicles and things, all the different elements that sort of constitute an energy system and how we can evolve that system. So that's a really exciting bit of work that we're doing. We're hoping to launch the first part of that in the middle of February. So that starts to create a discussion around actually how might London's energy system actually start to evolve in a way that will allow it to meet its targets in 2050 in the most cost-effective way. And then just quickly in conclusion, basically sort of we believe that district energy has got a really important role to play in a number of activities in decarbonising cities and things, obviously in reducing carbon emissions, also in energy efficiency at a city level, so as well as energy efficiency at a building level. Think about all that waste heat that's available within a city. If you can capture that and utilise that, then you're reducing demand for primary energy upstream, doing the same thing as energy efficiency at a building level. Obviously its contribution to security and resilience of supply, the affordability and addressing fuel poverty, and importantly the interface between the electricity network or the power network and heat networks, and the role that heat networks can sort of play for supporting the integration of renewables and grid balancing. Then just quickly summing up our journey, basically sort of getting that political support right at the beginning was fundamentally important, enabling that to go into our planning policies and saying, actually this is what London wants to do and we've got a commitment to district energy in areas where it is cost effective to do it, to promote that. We had that. We then we got our heat map, knowing where our heat demand is. We did our energy master plans to sort of start to understand where those priority areas are. Development team to develop those projects and support people to do that. Then the financing aspect as well, really fundamental, not only getting the development activity, but then providing finance that can support those projects and enable them to deliver a rate of return that will attract greater investment. And then obviously now what we're starting to do is looking at, this is where we are now, but where can we get to, and what kind of sort of low and zero carbon technologies are we able to utilise, and what kind of low carbon heat sources are we able to integrate to enable us to sort of get to continue to decarbonise that heat supply. And that's it. Thank you very much.